He was 18 years old when he inherited a key to a hole in the ground, and what he found there would rewrite not just his future, but everything he'd ever believed about his past. If you've ever felt like the world left you standing alone with nothing, stay with me and hit that subscribe button, because this one is yours. The lawyer's office reeked of aged paper and quiet, expensive defeat. I knew that smell. I'd breathed it in 100 times across the desks of social workers and case managers, but here it carried a different weight. This was the scent of money, even if that money had dried up long ago. My social worker, a woman named Carol who seemed permanently exhausted by the sheer fact of being alive, had called this meeting a formality. "Your grandfather's estate," she'd said, her voice flat and clinical, like she was reading a diagnosis off a chart. Quote, _1, _. So there I sat, one day past my 18th birthday, officially cut loose from the state's custody. Planted in a leather chair that was probably worth more than every single thing I owned, and everything I owned fit inside the duffel bag slumped between my feet. The chair groaned softly when I moved, a rich, leathery exhale of protest. I felt counterfeit in that room, the donated suit pinched across my shoulders, too tight in all the wrong places. A costume for a role nobody had cast me in. 2 years of group homes, 2 years of learning the quiet brutality of institutional existence. Those years had taught me exactly 3 things: how to shrink, how to watch, and how to want nothing. Useful skills in a room like this. The lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, looked as old as the volumes stacked along his walls. Thin white hair combed carefully over a pink scalp. Glasses that turned his pale, watery eyes enormous. He didn't bother with sympathy, just cleared his throat, a dry, papery rasp, and pushed a slim folder across the glossy mahogany between us. "Quote 2, he started. His voice sounded like gravel scraped across stone. Quote 3 __. He opened the folder. A single sheet of paper lay inside. It seemed impossibly thin, too small to hold the entire sum of a man's life. After settling outstanding debts with creditors, of which there were a significant number, the remaining liquid assets of the estate total $1,472. He let that figure sit in the air. It hung there between us like a held breath, not an insult, just arithmetic. I felt nothing. I hadn't laid eyes on my grandfather since I was 10. He'd become a ghost to me, a myth, a name buried in a case file. The man who sent me away. The man who, for 8 straight years, never wrote a single letter, never picked up a phone, not once. This pittance felt right. A final, wordless confirmation of exactly what I was worth to him. But Abernathy didn't close the folder. Quote 5 __. His tone didn't shift, not even slightly. He reached into a desk drawer and withdrew a large, yellowed manila envelope sealed with a thick stamp of wax. It looked like something pulled from a century that had forgotten us both. He slid it across the desk. It stopped just short of my hands. I had to lean forward to reach it. My name stared back at me from the front, written in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. Leo Davies. He was very specific about this, Abernathy said. It was to be delivered to you on your 18th birthday only, and only after the reading of the will. I picked it up. It carried weight it shouldn't have. Something hard and unyielding pressed against my fingers through the paper. The unmistakable shape of a key. And beside it, the stiff edges of something folded tight. Quote 8 __. I asked. My voice cracked through the silence, the first words I'd spoken since walking into that office. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. It is the deed to a parcel of land in northern Oregon, approximately 5 acres, and the key, I presume, to whatever is on it. He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Something flickered behind those thick lenses. Not pity. Something more layered than that. Curiosity, maybe. To be frank, Leo, the land is worthless, undeveloped, rocky, miles from any serviceable road. The county values it at next to nothing for tax purposes. It was his only asset that the creditors couldn't, or wouldn't, touch. Worthless. Same as the cash. A final punchline from a man I could barely recall. My fingers tightened around the envelope. I should have tossed it in the nearest trash can on my way through the lobby, taken the $1,400 and found the cheapest motel room in the city, sat on a stained mattress and figured out the rest of my existence from there. That was the smart play, the survivor's calculus. But something wouldn't let go. Maybe it was the finality pressing against my ribs. This was the last utterance of Alistair Davis, the final fragment of a puzzle I'd never been permitted to assemble. Why did he send me away? Why did he sever the thread between us and never look back? He wasn't a monster, I knew that much. The memories I still carried, cracked and bleached like old photographs, were of a gentle man. Rough hands that smelled of sawdust and pine sap. A man who crouched beside me at the riverbank behind his cluttered little house and showed me how to send a stone skipping across the water. That man did not match the one who would feed his only grandson into the system and vanish. "Is there anything else?" I asked. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Abernathy hesitated, a fraction of a second, almost nothing, but in that sealed, pressurized room, the pause detonated like a rifle shot. "Your grandfather was a complicated man," he said, quieter now. "He made choices that were difficult to understand. He wanted you to have this." He said it was the only thing of value he had left to give. The way his mouth shaped that word, value, carried weight far beyond currency. I stood. The leather chair exhaled beneath me, relieved. I slid the envelope into the inner pocket of my ill-fitting suit jacket. "We'll set one up. My assistant will handle it." I turned for the door. His voice caught me before I reached it. "Leo?" I glanced back. Arthur Abernathy's face was a wall, professional, neutral, perfectly composed. But his eyes, swimming behind those thick lenses, told a different story entirely. "Quote 16, he said. Quote 17. The bus north was a long, grinding crawl away from everything I recognized. The city, its grid of pavement, its familiar grey skyline, bled into suburbs, suburbs frayed into farmland, farmland dissolved into the dense, dark green throat of the Oregon wilderness. 14 hours I sat there, watched the world slide past the glass, felt like a ghost drifting along the margins of other people's living. I had the $1,400, minus the bus ticket, parked in a fresh bank account. A cheap burner phone Carol had pressed into my hand as a parting gift, and the heavy envelope from my grandfather. I'd torn it open on the bus, the engine's low drone a fitting accompaniment to what waited inside. An old iron key, heavy in the palm, pitted with rust, and a folded piece of paper. Not a modern deed, nothing typed or notarized, a hand-drawn map on thick, yellowed parchment, a circle sketched in red ink with an X planted at its center. Beside it, a set of coordinates. And beneath those, a single instruction, blunt and bare. The door is on the north face of the ridge. The key fits only one lock. Trust what you find. Burn the rest. Less an inheritance than a scavenger hunt, one designed by a man who'd lost his mind or was protecting something worth hiding. The bus carried almost no one, a handful of solitary figures hunched in their seats, each sealed inside whatever private wreckage they were hauling from one place to another. The air thinned and sharpened as we climbed, the sky pressed down, flat, colorless, offering nothing. I kept turning over what Abernathy had said. Some histories are better left buried. What did that mean? What kind of history could a carpenter even possess? The grandfather I remembered built birdhouses. He shimmed up sagging porches with scrap lumber and steady hands. He was not a man who trafficked in iron keys and cryptic warnings. Or maybe he was. Those memories belonged to a child. A 10-year-old sees what he wants to see: warmth, safety, the broad, simple strokes of love. Maybe I never saw the man at all. Maybe I only ever saw the performance he put on for a boy too young to ask hard questions. The iron key pressed against my ribs through the thin fabric of my jacket. It had its own pulse, steady, patient, waiting. 8 years inside the system had stripped the sentimentality out of me. Hope was not a virtue in group homes and transitional housing. Hope was an exposed nerve, something people could grab and twist. You learned to kill it early, or it killed you slowly. Every caseworker's promise that didn't land, every placement that fell apart, each one taught the same brutal arithmetic. Expect nothing, receive nothing, hurt less. But that key weighed more than every lesson the state of Oregon ever carved into me. A tiny, stubborn seed of something, I couldn't call it hope, not yet, was cracking open in the dry, compacted dirt of my chest. For the first time since I was 10 years old, I had a destination. A worthless scrap of land. A lock that matched a mystery. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. And that thread reached backward into a past someone had cut away from me with surgical precision. The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a single blinking yellow light. Hemlock Creek. That was the name on the map, and it was generous. A gas station, a diner bleeding neon through a cracked sign, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola logo painted onto its brick flank like a fossil from another century. The air hit me the moment I stepped down, sharp, clean, saturated with damp earth and pine resin, and something inside me buckled. That smell. I knew that smell. It belonged to a time before foster homes, before intake paperwork, before sleeping in rooms with strangers. It was a phantom limb of memory, something my body recognized even though my mind had spent years trying to bury it. Nostalgia and dread twisted together in my gut like two snakes sharing the same hole. I pushed into the general store, grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight, a pack of batteries, 2 bottles of water, a few protein bars. Survival math. The man behind the counter had the kind of face that weather and decades had sculpted into something resembling carved wood. Friendly eyes, a tired smile that had seen 10,000 strangers pass through and expected nothing from any of them. Quote 19, he asked, scanning my items. Quote 20. I set the map on the counter. Quote 21. His hands stopped. His eyes narrowed. Not suspicious exactly, but suddenly attentive. Quote _22. I slid the map closer. He fished a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket and squinted down at it. Quote 23, he murmured. Quote 24. Then he looked up at me, studied my face. Quote 25. Casual, like asking about the weather, but it landed in my sternum like a fist. Quote 26. Quote, I corrected. My voice came out tight, controlled, the way you learn to speak when every emotion is a liability. Quote 27. Quote. The old man's expression shifted. Something genuine moved behind those tired eyes. Sorry to hear it. He was a good man. Kept to himself, but a good man. Hard as woodpecker lips, but fair. He turned and pointed out the window toward the tree line. Ridge Road's about a 5-mile walk that way. Turns to gravel after 2, then to dirt. The property's at the very end. Can't miss it. A pause. It's where the road stops. I thanked him, paid, stepped back into the cold. 5 miles. On the map it looked like nothing. On foot, carrying everything I owned and everything I didn't yet understand, it felt like 50. The pavement surrendered to gravel exactly when he said it would. Each footstep crunched loud against the silence, the only human sound for miles. Wind moved through the towering pines that lined both sides of the road, like sentinels standing watch over something they'd been told never to speak about. The sky was bruising darker, clouds swelling, heavy, ready to split. I pulled up the hood of my thin jacket and walked faster. The dirt track gave out where the forest took over. Just a wall of green, tangled and dripping. Cold drizzle needled my skin. This was it, the end of the line. My grandfather's land didn't welcome me, it fought me. Blackberry brambles clawed at every inch. Ferns and young alder crowded together beneath ancient Douglas firs, so tall their canopy swallowed the sky. There was no house, no cabin, not even the bones of one, no foundation, no rotted posts, nothing. 5 acres of wild, ungoverned earth that answered to nobody. Exactly as worthless as Arthur Abernathy had warned. Despair hit me like a wave breaking against stone. I'd burned through every dollar I had, every scrap of hope, all of it chasing a dead man's ghost to this forgotten scar of dirt in northern Oregon. I was a fool, a lost kid playing pretend with an old key and a hand-drawn map. I nearly turned around. Nearly walked those 5 miles back to town, caught the next bus heading anywhere that wasn't here. But the map was still in my hand. North face of the ridge. I found the ridge without much trouble, a steep, rocky spine of land running along the back edge of the property like a clenched fist. Its north face dropped away, sheer, slick with moss, glazed with rain. It looked impossible, impassable. I spent the next hour scrambling along its base anyway. Hands scraped raw against wet rock, clothes plastered to my body, heavy with water. The rain came harder now, cold, relentless, personal, like the sky had something against me specifically. I was seconds from quitting. Then my boot caught a loose patch of earth. Soil gave way. A small cascade of dirt and stone tumbled free, rolling down the slope like a whispered confession. Underneath, where the moss and mud had torn loose, a flat grey corner jutted from the hillside. Not rock. Concrete. My heart slammed against my ribs hard enough to hurt. I dropped to my knees, started clawing at the ground with bare hands, ripping through roots and soil and decades of accumulated silence. Cold didn't register anymore. Rain didn't exist. I dug until my fingers went numb, then kept digging until they bled, uncovering a large rectangular concrete slab set flush into the hill like it had been waiting there since before I was born. In its center sat a recessed steel door, heavy, its surface buried under a thick crust of rust the color of dried blood. No handle, no latch, just one dark keyhole staring back at me like an eye. It was real. Whatever this was, whatever my grandfather had sealed into this ridge, it was real. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It sat heavy in my palm, ancient, dense with purpose. A relic from a life I'd never been allowed to know. I scraped mud from the keyhole with my thumbnail, guided the key in. Metal ground against metal, fighting me, resisting, as if testing whether I deserved entry. I pushed harder. With a final, reluctant surrender, the key sank to its full depth. Both hands on the shaft now. I turned. Nothing. I leaned in, put everything I had behind it. Shoulders, weight, the accumulated force of 23 years of unanswered questions. My muscles burned. Then something deep inside that door gave way. A groan rolled out from behind the steel, low, ancient, resonant, like the earth itself exhaling after holding its breath for decades. A metallic clang tore through the forest, so loud it sent a flock of crows exploding from the treetops in a black, shrieking cloud. The echo bounced off the ridge and came back changed, final, released. From the edges of the door, a smell crept out, musty, trapped air and long-sealed things, the breath of a room that hadn't tasted oxygen since before I existed. I inhaled, braced my shoulders against the concrete frame, pulled. The door was impossibly heavy, but it moved. Metal scraped against metal with a tortured screech that set my teeth on edge. I hauled it open just far enough to fit my body through the gap. The flashlight clicked on. Its beam punched a sharp white cone into absolute darkness. I stepped across the threshold, out of the rain. Into my grandfather's secret. The air inside hit different, cold, dead, carrying the weight of dust and damp concrete and something else underneath. A faint metallic tang, like old machinery, like a workshop sealed mid-task and never reopened. The flashlight beam swept the space, jittery in my trembling grip. It found a short, steep set of concrete steps descending into blackness so thick the light seemed to dissolve before reaching the bottom. I reached back, pulled the heavy door shut behind me. It sealed behind me with a low, bone-deep boom that traveled up through the concrete and into the bottoms of my feet. Silence crashed in like a wave, total, suffocating, pressing against my eardrums with an almost physical weight. Nothing but my own breathing. Ragged, too fast. I was entombed. For one raw second, panic owned me completely. What if this door didn't open from the inside? Every instinct screamed at me to scramble back up those steps and test it. I almost did. But I stopped myself. Trust what you find. His words. My grandfather's words. I pulled one long, deliberate breath into my lungs and started down. The steps delivered me into a large, square room. My flashlight beam cut across it in a slow arc, boots grinding against dusty concrete. What I saw stopped me cold. This was a military bunker. No other description fit. Thick, poured concrete walls, a ceiling braced with heavy steel I-beams. Not a workshop, not a cellar, a fortress built to survive catastrophe. One entire wall held shelving, military surplus equipment arranged with obsessive precision. Gas masks, sealed in canvas bags, tins I could only assume were rations, canteens, several jerry cans of water. In the far corner, a narrow cot with a wool blanket folded tight enough to bounce a coin off. Beside it, a small wooden table, a single chair. Everything Spartan, everything functional, everything waiting, as though someone had prepared this room years ago and never returned to use it. A tomb, a fallout shelter, a hiding place for the end of all things. Why would a carpenter build this beneath his cabin? What was Alistair Davis running from? What terrified him enough to bury a bunker under his own floor? My flashlight found it then, a large green metal footlocker tucked beneath the cot. The only personal object in this entire underground room. No padlock. My fingers were still half numb from the cold, clumsy and stiff. I fumbled with the latches. They popped open with a sharp, decisive snap. I raised the heavy lid. Cedar and mothballs. That was the first thing. The smell rising from inside like something alive. Folded neatly on top was a set of old work clothes. Flannel shirt, denim overalls, worn soft at the elbows and knees. And underneath the mothballs, underneath the cedar, sawdust. Faint but unmistakable. The scent hit me like a fist to the sternum. That was him. That was my grandfather, reduced to a smell trapped in fabric, preserved in a metal box underground. Beneath the clothes, a small framed photograph. I lifted it out, wiped the grime from the glass with my thumb. A much younger version of me stared back, 5 years old, maybe 6, sitting on his shoulders. Both of us grinning into the camera, sun cutting straight into our eyes. I didn't remember anyone taking that picture, but I remembered what it felt like. The height of those shoulders, the grip of his hands on my ankles, the absolute certainty that nothing could touch me up there. Safe, on top of the world. Something hard and sharp lodged itself in my throat. At the very bottom of the locker, beneath the clothes, beneath the photograph, beneath everything, was what I'd come for. A stack of envelopes, bound together with a piece of rough twine, every one of them addressed to me in that same cramped, spidery handwriting. I counted at least a dozen, but one sat on top, separated deliberately from the rest. A single word written across its face. First. My hands shook so violently I could barely work the knot loose. I lowered myself onto the edge of the cot. Thin mattress springs cried out in the dead silence, a sound almost violent in air that still and that heavy. The tear of the envelope opening cracked through the bunker like a gunshot. Several pages inside, crisp paper, every line packed with that tight, controlled script pressed hard into the page. I unfolded them, drew one more breath, and began to read. Quote 31, quote it started. Quote 32, quote, before you were born, I was not a good man. I ran with people who did their business in darkness. I made a mistake, a terrible one. I went into partnership with a man named Silas Croft. The deal was supposed to be legitimate land development, but Croft was a predator. He used intimidation, threats, outright fraud, forcing people off their property for pennies. Quote 33 __. When I discovered how deep it went, I wanted out. I had evidence against him, ledgers, documents, enough paper to put him behind bars for decades. I threatened to take it all to the police. That was my mistake. Croft did not tolerate threats. He made his position clear. If I ever breathed a word, he would destroy everything I loved. And by then, Leo, the only thing in this world I loved was you. Your parents were gone. You were all I had left. He knew that. He had me followed. He had you followed. I saw them, parked outside your school, sitting in a car while you played at the park. They weren't observing. They were hunting. I lived every single day in a state of gut-wrenching terror. Not for myself, for you. I couldn't go to the police because Croft had people embedded everywhere. I couldn't reveal the evidence without exposing the threats, and exposing the threats would have painted a bigger target on your back. I was trapped. I stopped. My chest had clamped shut. Each breath came thin and shallow, barely enough to keep me conscious. A memory surfaced, sharp, unbidden. I had told my grandfather about a strange car, a dark sedan that kept appearing. He went white. His whole face became a mask of something I was too small to name. Fear. Pure, liquid fear. He told me it was nothing, just my imagination. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I forced my eyes back to the page. I built this bunker with my own hands, years before, as a precaution. A place to disappear to if everything collapsed. But hiding you with me, that wasn't enough. As long as you were connected to me, you would be a target. You would be leverage. The only way to truly protect you was to cut that connection entirely. I had to make it look like I didn't care. I had to turn you into a ward of the state, a nameless file buried inside a vast, bureaucratic machine where Croft would never think to look. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The day I dropped you at the social services office, I told you I couldn't take care of you anymore. I saw the look in your eyes, the confusion, the betrayal. It shattered my soul, Leo. I drove away from you, and I did not stop crying for 100 miles. Every day for 8 years I have lived with that moment. Every morning I have opened my eyes carrying the weight of one single truth, that my son's son believes I threw him away. The letter slipped from my fingers, fell to the concrete without a sound. One tear broke loose, hot. It carved a clean line through the filth on my cheek. Then another. Then they stopped being individual and became a flood. I sobbed, not quietly, not gracefully. These were ugly, racking, full-body convulsions that ripped through my ribcage and bounced off every wall of that silent concrete tomb. 8 years of fury. 8 years of poison I had mistaken for truth. A loneliness so total, so ancient, that I had forgotten there was ever a time before it. I wasn't abandoned. I was hidden. Deliberately, brutally, selflessly hidden by the one person who loved me enough to let me hate him for it. I cried for the grandfather I had cursed, for the man who had locked himself inside his own prison of grief just so I could walk free without knowing it. I cried for the 10-year-old boy who stood in that social services lobby and watched the only family he had left walk out the door. The boy who learned, that day, to build walls around his heart so thick, so high, that nothing could ever get through again. I cried until there was nothing left to give, until I was just a hollow, aching shell sitting on a cot in the dark. The truth of my past, stripped naked by a letter from a dead man's hand. When that storm of grief finally broke, what remained was something I didn't expect. Calm. Strange, unsettling calm. The bunker didn't feel like a grave anymore. It had shifted into something else entirely. A sanctuary. A place where lies couldn't survive. I sat there in that underground silence for what might have been hours. The flashlight beam grew dimmer by the minute. The weight of the earth pressed in from every direction. The letter lay crumpled on the floor where I'd dropped it. One paragraph left unread. I reached down. My hands were steady now, spent, and I read the final words. "This bunker is yours now, Leo. There are supplies here to last you for months. There is more information hidden away if you feel you need it. But you don't have to look for it. My fight does not have to be your fight. You are free. You can take what little money I left you and walk away. Start a new life. Forget about me and forget about Silas Croft. That is all I ever wanted for you, to be safe and to be free. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. Know that every day I was proud of you. Your loving grandfather, Alistair." The choice he offered was so clean it cut like a blade. Walk away free, or dig deeper and inherit a war. 8 years of my life had been built around one principle: survival. Keep your head low, stay invisible, don't make waves. The smart move, the sane move, was obvious. Take whatever money he'd scraped together. Disappear. Honor his sacrifice by living the unburdened life he'd purchased at such a monstrous price. But could I actually do that? Could I turn my back knowing Silas Croft still drew breath? The man who stole my childhood. The man who sentenced my grandfather to decades of solitary torment, hiding in the shadows like an animal. All that anger I'd carried for years, directed at Alistair, aimed at a man who didn't deserve a drop of it, now had its rightful target. Cold, dense, lodged deep in the pit of my stomach like a stone. It didn't whisper, it demanded justice. And there was something else, something quieter but just as powerful. That part of me starved for connection since before I could remember. This story, his story, our story, was the last living thread between us. Walking away from it would mean abandoning him a second time, and I had already lost him once without knowing I'd ever had him. If you've ever stood at a crossroads like that, a moment where the person you were simply cannot be the person you remain, then you understand what moved through me. Terror and electricity in equal measure. The past handing you a reason, the future demanding a decision. I want to pause here for a moment. If any piece of what I'm describing has touched something you carry in your own chest, I'm glad you found this. Hit subscribe if you want to be part of something built for people who've had to dig for their own truth underneath years of silence and hurt. That means more than I can say. Now, back to that bunker. Because the choice I made down there wasn't just about settling a score with history, it was about the man I would become from that moment forward. I folded the letter with care, creased it along its original lines, slid it back into the envelope. I would not walk away. I couldn't. I owed it to him. I owed it to the 10-year-old boy who never got the chance to say a proper goodbye. I needed to know the rest. I needed to see this through to whatever waited at the end. His fight was mine now. The letter had mentioned more information, hidden somewhere in this room. I stood. My joints screamed, stiff from cold, stiff from hours of sitting on concrete. I took the weakening flashlight and started searching. The shelves first. I tapped the walls behind each one, listening for hollow spaces. Pulled down tins of food and checked for false bottoms. Nothing. I moved to the cot, lifted the thin mattress, ran my fingers along every weld of the metal frame. Nothing. Inch by inch I covered that room, every corner, every seam, every surface my hands could reach. Frustration building with each dead end. Where would a man like my grandfather hide something that mattered? A practical man. A careful man. He would tuck it somewhere obvious enough to be overlooked, or somewhere so unlikely that no one would ever bother searching. My gaze drifted downward to the floor. Solid concrete, nothing remarkable. But beneath the spot where that cot had sat, where the footlocker once rested, the surface looked different. I dropped to my knees. My palms swept across it slowly. A seam, barely visible. A hairline fracture tracing a perfect square, 2 feet by 2 feet. I pressed the edge. Nothing. I fished the iron key from my pocket, the only tool on me, and worked its tip into that crack, pried upward. The concrete shifted with a low, grinding scrape. A panel, a lid. I got my fingers beneath it and heaved, heavy, but it gave. Underneath lay a small, dark hollow, and sitting inside that hollow was another box. Steel this time, the kind people use for documents and cash. No lock on it. It was just sitting there, waiting. I pulled it free. Far heavier than something that size had any right to be. I carried it to the table and set it down. My heart hammered again. Slow, dense thuds echoing through the silence of that bunker. One breath. Deep. Then I opened it. The air left my body. Cash. The entire top layer was cash. Stack after stack of $100 bills, each bundle cinched with plain rubber bands. I didn't count it. Tens of thousands at least, maybe more. A fortune by any measure. Enough to vanish. Enough to live quietly and comfortably for years. The escape he had promised me. But underneath all that money sat something worth infinitely more. A thick, leather-bound ledger. And another envelope, sealed with the same wax stamp as the one Arthur Abernathy had given me. I broke the seal on the letter first. Same handwriting. But the tone had shifted completely. This was not a grieving grandfather anymore. This was a man sharpening himself for battle. "Leo," it began, "if you have found this, you have chosen not to run. I am sorry for that. I am sorry this has fallen to you. But I am also proud. This is the choice I could never make. The money is yours no matter what. Use it to protect yourself. But this ledger, this is the weapon. It contains everything. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat Silas Croft ever made. It is my confession and his conviction all in one. I was his bookkeeper in the beginning. I saw it all. It's all in there. The names, the dates, the accounts. It is the truth. For years, Croft has been trying to acquire all the land on this ridge for a luxury resort development. He has bullied and bankrupted every family here. My 5 acres are the last holdout. I stopped breathing for a moment. Read that part again. This worthless piece of rock is the linchpin in his multi-million-dollar plan. He thinks with me gone, the land will be his. He doesn't know about you. The letter continued, methodical, precise. It detailed exactly what the ledger contained, how to decipher the codes my grandfather had built into it. Page after page, documenting a criminal empire from the inside out. And then the final lines arrived like a hand gripping my shoulder. "You have 2 choices, son. Take the money and the ledger and disappear. He will never find you. Or take this to Arthur Abernathy. He was my only friend, the only one I trusted. He will know what to do. The choice is yours. Avenge me or live for me. Either way, be safe." I closed my eyes. The ledger sat in my lap, and I could feel the weight of it, Not just the paper and the binding, the weight of what it held. A book of sins, my grandfather's sins, Croft's sins, tangled together, inseparable, a heavy inheritance. Right in the middle of all that weight, the letters, the truth, the enormity pressing down on my chest, a sound ripped through the silence like a blade, sharp, foreign, wrong for this place. It took my brain a second to catch up. My phone, that cheap burner rattling in my pocket, its tinny ringtone obscene against the stillness of this underground tomb. I dug it out with clumsy fingers and answered. "Hello, Leo, it's Arthur Abernathy. I'm glad I reached you. We have a problem." A big one. What is it? My own words came out hollow, like they belonged to someone standing 10 feet behind me, watching all of this happen to somebody else. A development firm, Croft Enterprises, had just filed an accelerated foreclosure claim against my grandfather's property. That's what Abernathy told me. The words came rapid and blunt, no pauses, no softening. They produced a promissory note, supposedly signed by Alistair, supposedly securing a massive debt against the land. They claimed he'd defaulted. The note looked legitimate on its face, but Abernathy knew Alistair, knew he would never have been that reckless. It had to be a forgery. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was they had a judge willing to play along. An expedited hearing had already been granted, 48 hours to file a formal response, or the court would hand them the title outright. They were trying to steal it, and they were doing it at a dead sprint. Silas Croft. Not a name buried in faded ink anymore, not a phantom from a dead man's letter. Real, moving, making his play before the dirt on my grandfather's grave had settled. Alistair had been gone less than a week, and his enemy was already clawing at the gate. The timing was surgical, deliberate. Croft had been circling, patient as a vulture, waiting for my grandfather to die. He assumed the property would drift into tangled probate, easy pickings, pennies on the dollar, no one left to fight. He never accounted for me, never imagined the bunker, never suspected the letters, the evidence, the ledger that sat open across my knees right now, heavy with decades of meticulously documented truth. The world above had kept turning while I'd been sitting underground, swallowed by the past. Now the past was crashing headlong into the present, and the present demanded an answer. "Leo, are you there?" Abernathy's voice, strained, barely holding. "Did you hear me?" I looked down at the ledger, looked at the stacks of cash, heard my grandfather's words echoing off the concrete walls of my skull. Avenge me or live for me. There was no choice anymore. Croft had erased it. He wasn't just coming for dirt and timber. He was coming for my grandfather's memory, coming to bulldoze the last trace of Alistair Davies off the face of the earth and pour a resort foundation over his bones. Something shifted inside me then, cold, precise. The fear didn't fade, it burned away, replaced by a resolve so hard I could feel it in my jaw, in my fists, in the rigid line of my spine. I was not a scared kid drifting through a system that never wanted him, not anymore. I was Alistair Davies' grandson, and this was my land. "I hear you, Mr. Abernathy." My voice had changed. I could hear it myself, steady, low, calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with certainty. "I think I have something you need to see. Something that's going to stop Mr. Croft for good." "What did you find, son?" "I knew he kept it. I told him to burn it, told him to run, but he was too stubborn, too honourable. Your grandfather was my best friend, Leo. He saved my life once, a long time ago. I owed him a debt I could never repay. Helping you. Maybe this is how I finally do it. This is it. This is more than enough. Your Honour, before we proceed, I would like to submit new evidence pertaining to the business practices of the plaintiff, Mr. Silas Croft. Figured you might be thirsty, heard what you did, what your granddad did. Alistair was a hard man, but he was a good one. He loved this land, and he loved you more than anything. He just had a hard way of showing it. A lump built in my throat, dense, immovable. I know, I said. I finally know. I wasn't a ward of the state anymore. That label, the one stamped on every file, every transfer form, every caseworker's clipboard, it didn't fit. It never had. I was Leo Davis, son of this soil, grandson of a man who dismantled his own life, board by board, to build a wall between me and destruction. My story was never abandonment. It was sacrifice. It was a love so fierce it chose to be hated rather than risk being the reason I got hurt. It was the hardest, loneliest kind of devotion a person can offer. The kind that gets no credit, no thanks, no recognition, until long after the one who gave it is gone. It was a story of coming home. My grandfather left me with a decision. Not money, not land, a decision. Run from what happened, or pour a new foundation on top of the old one. I chose to build, and I am still building. Standing here today on this ground that carries my name, I feel something I spent 23 years believing was not meant for people like me. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't need everything to be perfect. The kind that sits comfortably beside grief. The past doesn't have to be a cell you serve time in. It can be a blueprint. It can be the solid ground you stand on while you frame up something new. So let me ask you, what foundation are you building on? What pieces of your own history have you had to dig up, dust off, and reclaim before you could become who you are right now? If this story reached somewhere real in you, if you have ever had to fight just to own your own truth, I would be honored if you left a piece of your story in the comments. Your words carry weight here. This is a place for people who understand that the deepest roots push through the hardest ground. Thank you for staying with me through this, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe. Be part of this conversation, because every one of us deserves a place to call home.